morning, everyone. We're still having some people log in at the moment, so we're going to wait a minute or a minute and a half before we actually start. So if you can just be patient for a minute and then we'll get going. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your patience. And welcome to our first cybersecurity in the physical and IoT world, or in the physical security and IoT world. We've got quite an interesting lineup today. We've got a great panel of experts who are going to be discussing the topics, and our panel comes from a whole variety of fields in the physical, cyber, and IoT worlds. So they've all just enabled their video so you can see them all there. This is a round table for those of you who've never watched a round table with us before, meaning there's no slides or anything like that. It's just a discussion. The process is I will ask a question and then the various panelists who have knowledge in that field will answer it. And obviously, you as the audience can ask questions as well. If you just click on the Q&A button, after every question that I ask, we'll see if there's questions from the attendees, and we'll put those to the panelists as well. Dominique is with us. I'm sure everyone knows Dominique. She's been sending the emails and what have you to remind you of the event and all that. So thanks to Dominique for that. And she'll be monitoring all the chat sessions and everything, and we'll let you know, or we'll ask the questions at the appropriate time. For the panelists, if you do want to, or if you see a question come up and while you're busy speaking and you want to answer it directly, I mean, you're more than welcome to jump in and answer it. We've got a few polls along the way as well. We would appreciate it if you could respond to them. They're all anonymous, so we just hopefully get a few some idea of what's happening in the cybersecurity world that we're working in at the moment. And right at the end, we have a survey which will come up on your browser window, whether you're logged on via your PC or your mobile, and that'll have all the panelists' names in it. And if you want a panelist to contact you, please select one or more of the panelists and enter your email address, and we will pass your email address along to the various panelists, and they can get hold of you. And if there's something you need to discuss, then you're most welcome to discuss it. So we're going to do our first poll now, just a basic one on cybersecurity. And while that's going on, I'm just going to talk about why we're doing this roundtable. And why we want to talk about cybersecurity in the physical security and IoT world. The reason is basically that physical security, your cameras, your access control and everything is an is an IoT device. They communicate with a server or a data center or even a mobile device these days. And in most cases, even if it's not intentional, these devices are connected to the internet, which means they're vulnerable. Now, when it comes to IoT devices, and so just to make it simpler for me, I'm just going to refer to physical security and IoT as IoT devices. So we're not going to, unless there's a specific reason, separate, surveillance cameras or something like that from other IoT devices. ABI Research classifies IoT devices into 3 markets or 3 areas according to security, and those with low, moderate, and high security requirements. So, I mean, looking at our security markets, a PIR motion detector, for example, that might be classified as low security. But a camera would be classified as high security because it captures sensitive data, it can store and transmit sensitive data, and so on. And ABI also says that right about now, there are something like 8 billion IoT connections in the world which are connected to the internet. And that's expected by 2026 to reach 23 billion. So those of you with connected homes and whatever, it's only going to get worse with more devices and more connections and more things talking to the internet, which obviously means we need to secure them all. And in terms of low security devices, even there's an old story which I'm going to repeat because I kind of like it. It's about the casino in Las Vegas who had a thermometer in a fish tank, and they were monitoring it on their server to make sure the fish were nice and warm, or whatever you do for fish. And because they hadn't secured the thermometer, and I mean, who thinks you need to put a firewall behind your thermometer, or in front of your thermometer, I should say. But hackers hacked into the thermometer, or they didn't hack into the thermometer, they hacked into the system through the network, through the thermometer, and were able to steal the list of, or the database of VIP guests for the casino, which obviously wasn't a good thing. So anything that sends a signal can be hacked. And I mean, even though a thermometer doesn't have the processing power to actually do anything or do any damage, it still sends a signal to the network, which allowed the hackers in that example to get onto the network. And from there, they got administration access, root access, and took whatever they wanted. And while, I mean, it's a fact that none of us can ever be totally cyber secure, there are ways and processes and things we need to do to mitigate the risks, and that need to be mitigated throughout our supply chain. So from the hardware manufacturers through to the software developers, the integrators and installers, the designers, the maintainers of hardware, software, networking, cloud services, and so on, they all need to do their bit to make sure that they and the people they're connected with are secure. So I think that's enough from me for an introduction. What I'm going to do is now we're going to go through the, let me just, sorry, I forgot to share the results so everyone can see it. We're going to go through the list of panelists we have. We have 6 panelists here, and each of them is just going to introduce themselves, say where they are from and what their companies does. And I'd also like to throw a sort of a non-scheduled question in there and just ask the panelists as we go through, if they can just tell us, what they think or what they have seen in their fields of operation are the most important aspects of cybersecurity in their particular fields. Sorry, I'm busy playing with a poll there, so I'm getting lost. If they can tell us what the biggest trend is they're seeing right now in their particular field, in the cybersecurity trend in their field. And as I said, we have people from different fields, so the answers should be quite interesting. I'm just going to go through the panelists as they appear on my screen. One thing I did forget. As you would have seen in the promotion emails and everything, Milestone is sponsoring this event. So thank you to Milestone for making this possible. And George, thank you. And seeing George is on the top left of my screen, we're going to start with him. George, if you can introduce yourself and answer the trend question, and then we can get into other questions. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the online chat. My name is George Psulis. For those of you that don't know me, I represent Milestone Systems, which is a video management platform, or in the CCTV world. And to answer Andrew's question, we have seen a massive drive for a lot of edge devices that are coming into software platforms. And no longer are cameras seen as optical devices. We are seeing them as actual IoT units that bring back information back into our realm. And as networks and companies grow, wide area networks, you're connecting cameras and devices in the field, there is a huge need for cybersecurity to make sure that these devices aren't hacked or infiltrated by cybercrime people. So essentially we are deep in that, and I'm glad that we're having this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Ian, if we can go over to your side, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, my name's Ian Shack. I'm the Principal Solution Architect and Information Officer at Cycom. Cycom we're an ISP and a VoIP operator. So I would say the biggest trends which we are seeing, which we have been seeing and promoting for a long time are in VoIP security and prevention of toll fraud, which has long been a scourge, and we've become very good at weeding that out. From a broader market perspective, I'd have to say POPIA and compliance is the biggest trend we're seeing coming through. It's probably the more boring side of security, answering all the questionnaires and making sure all the documentation's in place. But it should be viewed as a necessary tool to get us there and make us ultimately all more secure as providers and consumers.
I've lost your voice there, Andrew.
The new word of the 2020, you're muted.
Yeah. So seeing that Andrew is not maybe offline, Charles, if you'd like to go next.
Yes, thank you. My name is Charles Ickerman, CEO of AVS Cybersecurity International. And so, yeah, glad to participate and listen to the audience, and hopefully we can add some value in terms of the kind of questions that have been asked. So I think just to maybe quickly also just touch onto the core theme, I think work from anywhere is probably the biggest challenge. And people have dispersed all over the world and working from all sorts of locations without having the necessary security layers that they used to have in place. And hence, people are ransomed left, right, and center purely because of that, because they don't have those layers of protection in place anymore. It's a key thing that we're seeing.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Can you guys hear me this time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, okay. There's always something that has to go wrong. But thanks, Charles. Marcel, do you want to have a bash at it next?
Yes, thank you. So my name is Marcel Brains. I work for Access Communications. Access Communications is really a manufacturer of surveillance products. I think traditionally everybody would know us as the camera manufacturer, but over the past few years, we've been exploring a little bit into audio and access control as well. And we're seeing some great success around the world in some of those fields. I think the biggest trend is pretty similar to what George said. Our devices are no longer just used as a camera. There's lots of applications that can be loaded onto it, a lot of information that's being sent back to servers. And I think hand in hand with using AI and making these devices a lot more intelligent, there's a trend to start putting this information into the cloud as well. And of course, that opens up a lot of issues in terms of cybersecurity and the ability for somebody to try and gain access to that product as well as the information that's being shared. So I think that's our biggest trend.
Right, thanks, Marcel. Richard, if you can have an introduction quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. I'm Richard Frost, Head of Product for Network and Endpoint Security at Vox. We obviously specialize a lot more around the endpoint from networks and laptops, but we're obviously seeing a lot more IoT devices on the networks. We do have our own IoT divisions that do camera systems as well as protection for the elderly, so sort of panic buttons. Just from experience of what we've seen in the industry, we've responded to a couple of breaches in the past before as well. And we've done penetration testing on client networks to try and eliminate further breaches by telling them where they're having holes in their environments. And some of the things we've actually picked up is unsecured camera systems, which is quite strange. We actually managed to get into the camera system from the internet. We could actually see into the CEO's office. We could see what they were doing, writing on contracts, all kinds of things like that. And those are supposed to be secured environments. I think as well, some of the things that we've seen, and referring back to Ian's point on POPIA, the camera systems are no longer just tracking from a security aspect. You've got analytical data that's in there now as well. So I saw a presentation the other day where an airport was using cameras, facial recognition software to actually track people walking through the airport. Now that data has been stored somewhere, and again, you start having questions around POPIA. They use statistics now to actually see hot and cold aisles within stores. So they can actually see the products where there's a lot of people congregating, and they can see where there's not so much. And shops can actually use that data now to start moving products from shelf to shelf. So again, it's all kind of data that's been kept around our personal information and what we're doing as users. So yeah, I think the security in this area is definitely, needs to be stepped up a lot more.
Cool, thank you. And last but not least, Devik.
Hi, thanks, Andrew. I'm Devik Barkley from Cypher Engineering. I head up our security department. We specialize in safety and physical security consulting projects, where we look at physical security, fire detection, and also some automation. Just speak to some trends that we see. We see a couple of trends, majority of them being that with the integration of multiple security systems, the inevitable issue comes up that you place different security processes and users and roles into a same network. And with those having different user roles and ways of identifying who's activating to them, you tend to create some vulnerabilities. So yeah, that's one of the major trends we've seen. And we've also seen how people are exploited to get past the physical barriers of access control to get to the more robust side of the cybersecurity side, where they've got direct access to patching into your switches and those kind of things, which is also a very big issue, as then most of your physical or your cybersecurity controls that's been put in place is already bypassed by just being in a physical location where the switches are. So that's from our side a trend we've been noticing, and yeah, we're looking forward to this discussion. Think it's high time that we have this topic elaborated on from various parties in the industry.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, those are our 6 experts. We're going to get into the questions now. As I said, if the audience, the attendees have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom and ask them, or the chat button. I'm not sure what's on the audience's screen, but yeah, let them if they're welcome to, let me try that again. You're welcome to send them through. Okay, the first question I want to ask relates to something I said in the beginning. Physical security systems are in the same boat as IoT devices, and we've been using them for years in different ways, but these days, the whole world is connected. So, and it's not only to a network. As I said, sometimes even without anyone realizing it, these things are connected to the internet via some other way, or shadow IT or something like that. So the first question is, there are many companies that pay lip service to the security of their endpoints. Now, endpoints can be a camera or an access control reader or a thermometer and a fish tank, but what are companies doing to ensure that within their particular field or their area in the supply chain, they bake security into their devices from the start so that it's safe and secure from the start? I think, George, you volunteered to comment this. So do you want to start off?
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. So indeed, Milestone in itself, as an example, has opened itself not only to video cameras, but to huge amounts of devices out in the field. I mean, tracking of temperature devices, et cetera, fire panels, cameras, and so on. And many of these devices are sitting out in the field, unsecured networks, or in a DMZ, whatever the case may be. And I think it's a very fine line between hardware and software, right? So creating these direct connections, usernames and passwords that are protected and changed, et cetera, user interfaces that are encrypted. And it's a big drive, not only from software, but also from a hardware vendor point of view. So in our point is, when we sit down with consulting engineers and the like and end users, it is our job to communicate this information alongside with whatever the vendors are. Because these days, if the integrations aren't secure, infiltration is high, and we've seen a huge amount of cyber attacks in South Africa with a lot of big end users, etc. So I think it's a complementary when you're using products that share similar knowledge and guidelines. So there is a hardening guide. I mean, we comply full on end-to-end hardening, HTTPS connectivity, et cetera, making sure that this is prevented.
Andrew, you're muted.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Charles, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think practically, in terms of what organizations need to do, they need to make sure that those edge devices or the IoT devices, first of all, goes through HTTPS traffic. In other words, the traffic itself is encrypted. And then furthermore, to also encrypt the payloads to make sure that the data that's being sent through to your central control sites are being encrypted. And I see there's a trend where IoT manufacturers are now starting to put encryption boards right at the edge. I'm not sure about the access cameras and things like that and so on, but certainly in the IoT world, they're putting the encryption right at the sensor level, and then that communicates right through to where the data is being consumed in the SQL format. And then obviously from a DMZ perspective is to make sure that those IoT and the physical security devices are DMZ'd from your IT networks, and for that matter also your OT networks, because IoT.
Sorry, Charles, can you explain what DMZ is and OT?
Sorry, yeah, demilitarized zone. So basically segmenting in your network, segmenting your IoT traffic different from your IT network. In other words, the example you used right in the beginning with the thermometer in the fish tank is to ensure that data that's being sent to the fish tank for its temperature and readings and so on for the fish are totally separated from your IT network. Or for that matter, from, in this case at the casino, from its slot machines and so on. So demilitarizing it, so put it into separate segments. And then the same principle is applicable to OT networks as well. So just like IoT, or operational technology, just like you have IT, and this is in the factories and the mines and so on, where they run SCADA systems. Those SCADA systems also these days run, they don't run on their own unique protocols anymore. They are also just connected onto TCP/IP, normal Ethernet connections. And they just plug them into the same switch without segregating those switches to say this is IT network traffic and this is OT network traffic. So from an OT perspective, encrypt the packets and make sure the payload is encrypted, and split up your normal traffic, identify them clearly.
Cool, thank you. Marcel, you also put your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So to add from our side and to comment on Charles, we do have security built in on the edge. Pretty much all of our products are built with the design with cybersecurity in mind, and that's sort of the base of where we start. And security should be part of the overall design. And of course, we have many features built into the product that has cybersecurity. One of them is a trusted platform module, which speaks directly to the VMS. So you have a handshake, there is HTTPS communication. We have features like digitally signed firmware, so that only an approved firmware version of that camera will be allowed. So if somebody does gain access to it and try to change something in the firmware, something will be flagged, or the camera won't function correctly. So it will basically stop that attack. But I think it's also important to realize that even if we're on the cutting edge of the technology, there's always someone that's trying to do something differently. And I think the onus is also on the end customer or the system integrator to make sure that they're following up and keeping up to date with the latest firmware versions, and making sure that they keeping the product at its latest version to make sure that the cybersecurity stays up to date. I think that's the most important thing.
Ian, you wanted to say something? Ian,
yes, yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I think Marcel hit the nail on the head there. I just wanted to add in that I think the IoT vendors have got they've got a tremendous challenge in that the customers, the consumers, and indeed the malicious type hacker people are always going to have physical access to their devices, these devices, and as any sort of hacker will tell you, when they've got physical access to a device and they get to probe it and deconstruct its firmware and that sort of thing, it's a lot of the battle won. And that means that the IoT vendors have got to go a step further, as Marcel was saying, with securely signing firmware, perhaps even red teaming and pen testing their stuff. But yeah, as Marcel says, some of the onus is on the customer to make sure that if you are, especially in a corporate setting, and you're making big investments in a particular device or technology, that you're taking that extra bit of care to make sure that the vendor has done their bit as well.
Cool. Thanks, Davik.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. I'd actually like to just extend that topics raised by Marcel and Ian, as both of those are actually very valid points. But an extra element on top of that, in terms of the physical access, is many times the physical security that is on the installation done in the installation time. They use a panel box that uses all the same panel keys. So I can buy that panel key at the shop downstairs. I can get onto any site and I can physically open those boxes. It's little things like that that the installers on site and the system integrators also need to be vigilant of, and to understand that these hardening guides that are produced by the actual vendors creating them, these documentations point out your best practices, installing things on safe side, unsafe side, where you actually need to take certain extra measures to ensure that there's tamper detection. If somebody's trying to open that box, that tamper detection actually needs to raise a signal in your control room. Many times I find I open those boxes and those tamper detections were never even connected up. So there are these little physical security elements that has been catered for in the industry, but the end users and installers never actually, should I say, apply those in practice. And then this does come back to the best practices guides that are set up. So it's a cybersecurity best practices and the actual physical installation side best practices. Don't use the common wafer locks, use a more hardened lock that has got its unique key. So it's a little bit more of a physical access is a very key issue in the security industry at the moment as well.
Cool, thank you. Richard, you had your hand up. I just wanted to, we were going into the second question here is a kind of follow on. Sorry, Richard, I'm not ignoring you. I'll come back to you in a second. The second question was, what should the end users be aware of in terms of securing their endpoints? You even, as we just heard, even if the manufacturers and the software developers and whatever do cater for security, at the end of the day, it's, the installation and how you install it and set it up is going to actually define whether that security is worth anything or not. So maybe we can just flow over into that from the end user perspective, what you need to do as well. So sorry, Richard, please go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. So I think, it follows on from the first question anyway, and it ties in quite nicely. And what I was actually going to say, it leads into point 2 anyway. If you look at the discussions that we've spoken about already around DMZs and stuff like that, it reiterates the point of IT and physical security working tightly together. We've noticed there's a move now, obviously, from analog to more IP-based systems. So you've got your cameras now that are using the same kind of IP-based systems. And again, if you're not segmenting your IT infrastructure and your security infrastructure, you're going to start having problems. We had a case where somebody actually went into a factory. They went up to an IP-based camera, unplugged the Ethernet cable, plugged it into a laptop, and hacked the whole system. So, we typically from an endpoint security perspective would create a guest access, which is secured so that if somebody does need to get onto the internet while they're at the office as a guest, they can get on, but they can't get onto the company's systems. And what we're finding from a security perspective is you've got these man on the streets type of vendors that are able to install the IP cameras and stuff, but they don't understand the security aspects of it, and they actually create vulnerabilities within an organization's environment. If you look at your fish tank thermometer or thermostats story there again, that device is creating access into the network through a common port like HTTPS. So to actually find out what the port is that's communicating, if it's not defined correctly or doesn't have strict controls in place, you could actually hijack that port. So a typical hacker or penetration tester would actually test that port until they could get through on it and then use it as a communication device.
Cool, thank you. George, you wanted to add something there?
Yeah, I think just to add on to what Richard had to say, and in general what Vic was alluding to as well. I mean, quite often our end users, the natural route is our buy the cheapest product, just make it work kind of topic. But the truth is, a lot of these unknown brands or brands that are cheap or unprotected, etc., some of them do come with malware that is built into the device. Now the people go, oh well, I have a secure network, how would this device communicate out? But these malware devices create bots, and they become little engines in your network, and eventually shut down your network, which is basically a denial of service, right? So even though we look at it and we try and harden the networks, etc., we need to make sure that these end devices that you're buying are actually secure and safe. Going back to Marcel's initial discussion around the cameras and certificates, the exchange of secure certificates, HTTPS connectivity, etc., is quite key out there. So do your homework and make sure that whatever you're buying complies to IT standards.
Thank you. Charles, I saw you busy typing an answer. Maybe you just want to sort of speak it out.
Yeah, no, I'll type the answer now on that IT-OT convergence just now. But I think on that second question, it all starts with identity and access control. So again, in terms of who has got access to what, and then, so first of all is to identify, are they the right people? Are they the right subjects that can have access to certain data? Because data is the gold. I mean, that's the core thing, whether it's zeros and ones in CCTV footage or zeros and ones in financial data. It's all about zeros and ones and how that data is being protected. So who has access to the data? First of all, access control. And then what happens with that data in motion thereafter? In other words, I will call it a pattern of life. You need to have a monitoring solution in place that you can monitor the patterns of life. Giving you an example, someone has access to confidential information, no problem. I have access to my confidential information, but would I, 2 o'clock in the morning, download a whole stack load of information from France whilst I'm actually located in South Africa at that point in time? And those are patterns of life. And that's the critical parts that we have to start monitoring, because we can't just depend on access control and try and lock it down as far as that's concerned. You have to monitor that pattern of life. So from an endpoint perspective, identity and access control, step one. Obviously, endpoint protection, a proper antivirus, as we would call it, proper endpoint protection, not the free version, because free versions are often developed by cyber criminals, as a matter of fact. So you certainly don't want to download a whole lot of free antivirus, because that will be your compromise in many cases. Patch management, and that's like, I mean, all hardware operate with software. There's a little chip inside, and it's a piece of hardware, but it's got code that actually makes it do what it needs to do. So hardware and just normal software all need to be patched continuously, because those weaknesses, those vulnerabilities within that software is identified by the manufacturers, and one needs to be aware of those and then make sure they are hardened from that point of view. So I think those are 4 key indicators, I would say, that the typical end user needs to do to make sure that their endpoints are properly secured, either IoT or normal IT laptops, mobile devices, whatever the case may be.
Cool. Thanks, Joel. Marcel, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I think just to add, and of course as a general statement, not maybe from an access only perspective, but and I think thinking back to the first poll that you had, the responsibility of cybersecurity doesn't just lie with the IT team. That's everybody within that organization is responsible for it. And I think there's a lot of effort needs to be put in from an organization perspective to educate the people that are working on their network, to understand that there are risks in everything that they do. I think there was a very good YouTube video that was made by HP back in a few years ago, where somebody basically gave a flash drive for somebody to print something, and on that had a piece of software that they basically used to hack the network. So I think it's important to educate everybody within their organization to say cybersecurity is a reality. And of course, if there's a company that's hacked, that affects the lives of everybody working for that organization. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well.
Right. Davik, you've got your hand up there.
Yes, Andrew, if I can just quickly add to Marcel there, it's something I've been very vigilant about in the latest, is the current marketing tactic when you're at any event is being handed a flash drive by a guy with company information on. And the amount of flash drive crossing over your table, people are so desensitized to it. The first place that a person does a social attack is making sure you cross routes with the flash drive they want you to, because everybody knows the first thing you do, oh, it's a 32 gig, it's a nice one, I'm putting it in. And yeah, that is something people really need to be vigilant about. So I just wanted to add on top of that from myself.
Okay. Okay, I've launched another poll here, which talks about the importance of the cloud. Now, as we know, I mean, I spoke to someone from AWS yesterday, and the services they provide are, I mean, the functions and the, I don't know, the software they've got sort of just ready for you to click. And I know Milestone, you can basically just do a couple of clicks and install an entire X-Protect system on Amazon. But obviously, you know, what does your end user need to know when it comes to the cloud? Because we assume, you know, that, just to use Amazon as an example, but we assume that if we're using Amazon, Amazon takes care of security and we don't have to worry about it. So, you know, how does the end user approach the whole idea of cloud and how to secure the cloud, even if the service provider does, you know, promise encryption and what have you and what have you? I'm going to end the poll, and I see that Richard, you've got your hand up if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just to lead into the cloud services discussion, one of the things that we have noticed is people are starting to adopt what they call zero trust. So basically, you know, even if we know what the device is or who the device is being used by, we still don't trust the device. And I think putting the checks and balances in place, I think I spoke earlier before the conference about the fact that I've got numerous Alexa devices around the house. You know, and we think Amazon is secure. You know, we shouldn't be trusting it. From a home perspective, there's products like Bitdefender Box that you could put in, and that would control all your data out onto the internet. So it almost acts like a firewall for the consumer. From a business perspective, I think, again, there are firewalls that are in place. Any communication from us to the cloud, any of our devices that are talking to the cloud itself, you can actually get cloud-based firewalls that you can actually secure your data in the cloud, or your antivirus solutions that are out there also have cloud-based controls. So I think even if we do, you know, use a device that's talking to the cloud that is a company-owned device and you think it's secure, make sure that there are the security protocols or products in place to secure further. If you think of some of the breaches that have been out there from a credential perspective, you look at like Facebook. If you're using the same username and password on Facebook and they go and steal all of those user data and then use that same credential to log into your Amazon cloud account or your Azure cloud account, you know, you could have trouble. So again, make sure that you have the right software in place, but also just make sure that your access controls are different to something you might be using for maybe your personal data. Segment, company and personal data. Don't use the same username and password in two different accounts.
Thanks. Charles, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, the biggest fallacy or the biggest mistake that people make is to think that we're moving our data from an on-premises data center into the cloud and now it's better protected. And that's the biggest mistake that people make. What is true is that environment, physical environment, is much better protected. And for normal operating system vulnerabilities and so on, sure, that platform is much better protected. That's all true. However, the access into that data is significantly more exposed. So think about it, when you had a data center in the past on premises, you had to maybe get into the building, you have to go past the CCTV, past the access control, then only do you get onto the computers or the server, because it had this, like a castle, it had these layers of protection. When it's in the cloud, it literally is exposed to anyone out there. The core infrastructure is safe, but not the access to the data. And that's the key. So again, here, just to add on to what Richard said, from an identity and access control perspective, things like multi-factor authentication. I personally believe that the username and password is 10 years past its sell-by date. People think that a good username and password is good enough. It's not. Use things like multi-factor authentication, use things like location awareness. Where are you accessing that data from? If I work normally on my computer from Cape Town and suddenly I'm trying to access this data from China, certainly it doesn't make sense. So, and the cloud providers actually provision all these tools for you to actually protect your data more properly, but people aren't activating those features in their cloud platforms, either on Azure or AWS. So it's like they've got the Porsche and they're doing 50 kilometers per hour with it, so it is tailoring and activating the security features that you have within the cloud environment. But otherwise, they don't take any responsibility for your data. That only absolutely resides on yourself as a user.
Great, thank you. Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I think we have to differentiate here between the public and private cloud. And that's especially true when we're thinking of the cloud in an IoT context. When you're building a milestone system, for example, and you're doing it in a private cloud, a lot of the security controls are within your control. Then we are talking about segmentation and encryption and firewalling and physical access and all those good things. On the public cloud, it is a little bit beyond the reach of the consumer or the corporate installing it, and you are reliant on AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud to a certain extent. But as Charles says, there are lots of tools and things built in there, so you still have to be prudent within their controls. The scary part for me is where it's neither a hyperscale public cloud nor a private cloud, but it's a smart IoT device which you don't actually know where it's talking to, and you probably don't know whether it's encrypted, whether it's using good firmware, good protocols, and it's possible for that device to be compromised. And for those public cloud services, the one which springs to mind recently was Ubiquity with the Unify cloud was compromised there, and credentials for hundreds of thousands of Wi-Fi APs and controllers were exposed, and probably being used in credential stuffing attacks. So the cloud is of course a scary beast which we all have to deal with, but I'd rather it be in a cloud I control than one which I know nothing about.
Thank you. George, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I'd just like to maybe end off that question is that, to assume that the cloud service is 100% secure is like to say that a doctor never gets sick, right? There is that connectivity between your site and the cloud. and all your devices that is either on site or roaming around wherever they are. And it's really essential to make sure that those devices are secure and encrypted as well. And quite often, I mean, the Alexa analogy is real. I mean, we all carry Garmin watches on our arms or devices that are walking around that connecting to the wireless network. Have we made sure that those devices are not communicating to a random server collecting data that we are not sure about? And especially in video, people think, oh, there's big talk around video. When we're going down accessing people's video in the cloud, we need to make sure of end-to-end encryption, and that is critical in our industry.
Cool, thank you. Another question I have is again, it's kind of similar to the previous one, talking about end users and what they need to do. But what end users mostly do is, they say either, the IT department's going to handle this, or they hire an installer or integrator or something. And as far as they're concerned, everything's secure because, Joe from down the road installed it and said it's secure. So what do the integrators need to do to be able to actually take advantage of all the things you guys offer them in terms of cybersecurity and things like that? Richard, I see you've got your hand up there. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think I was a little bit quicker than George, but if George wants to go first, he's welcome to.
Okay.
The point I just wanted to make from an integrator's perspective is, I was just wondering now, from, we've got POPIA regulations that are out. Do regulators do the integrators now need to show some compliance to POPIA as one? There's other standards that are out there like ISO 27001 and stuff like that. Do we need to start utilizing the integrators that have these kind of certifications, so that we know that they have the knowledge or the best practices around the security in those type of environments? I'm not quite sure exactly what ISO standard or what specific standards integrators need to conform to from like installing a camera or that, but that's the kind of thing I would look for if I was using an integrator in my environment. And then making sure the integrator and IT actually talk first. They understand what the risks are with the new system being installed and plan and project that. I mean, that would be my 2 cents worth.
George, you did have your hand up, yes.
Oh, I don't mind in the order, but just to add on that, I mean, you asked the question, what do we do as companies and so on? So Malson have published a full-on hardening guide, which is an end-to-end guide and checklist from products, securing whatever the device may be in the field through the networks, firewalls, onto servers, encryption on servers, preparing hard drives or cloud devices, whatever the case may be. So there is definitely a full-on guide. And to Charles' point, I think it was Charles, choose the right person integrator, no matter what product you install in your house, whether it's your home Wi-Fi router, it could be your smart Samsung fridge, whatever the case is, and make sure that that device is secure and encrypted, going to the right place in the internet. And then, of course, GDPR/POPI. I mean, there is information that is being shared these days. So we are collecting a huge amount of metadata within the different platforms, aggregating that information, but who gets to use it? And there is a huge guide around that as well on our website. And I'm sure likewise with the rest of the team.
George, in terms of people installing and integrating Milestone with whatever, I know you've got a lot of certifications that your installers or integrators go through. Is cybersecurity one of the sort of the things they have to certify themselves in or show that they know what they're doing?
It is one of the certifications that we offer. It's quite an in-depth guide, and it's really good. Even though you're not a camera installer, it's just really good to understand what it all entails, as well as the hardening guide, which is free. It's a checklist for any device that you're installing out there, out in the field, like I said. And we are pushing that harder and harder. So when we're engaging with end users and installers, it's definitely a topic that we are pushing these days.
Thanks. Devik?
Yes, if I can come in here, I'd like to expand that argument that the onus is not only on the installer, but also on the client. And that's specifically where the role of the consultant does come in, that they're usually employed to manage this installation and give them proper guidance on what is the security processes that they need to be aware of and take into consideration when designing and rolling out one of these installations. So from that perspective, I think something that is important here to mention is that you need to get a consultant that understands the technology that gets put in, firstly, understands what type of guides there are from the manufacturer's side, understand the requirements of the actual IT environment it's being installed in, and managing that installation process and guiding the client, making the right decisions and getting the right installer, because he'll, at the end of the day, would be the one saying, yes, this person does have the technical ability to install, and he'll be the one looking at all the different certifications. Is the person, does he have the right project management qualifications? Because that's an issue that a lot of times drops a security installation, nothing to do with the security items, but just the project itself not being managed properly. Other than that, you can look at your CompTI and other securities like your GIACs and your CISSPs. That's all more upper management level securities, but those roles needs to be filled within the installers, or they need to have a good understanding of those guidelines that are out there and those types of certifications that they can use for guidelines. And then, as mentioned earlier, there's a lot of frameworks as well in place. I mean, you get your 27,000 from ISO, then you also get a whole bunch of cybersecurity frameworks in terms of your Nest 800, all those type of frameworks they can look at as well in deploying these types of systems and what things they need to consider when deploying it. So yeah, that would be my act. There's a lot of guidelines. There's a lot of actual consideration that needs to be taken from the consultant side, and he needs to drive that and ensure that the client gets what he's supposed to get. And he also needs to verify the installer does have the technical capabilities and also does the installation according to what the plan was.
Cool, thank you. Marcel.
Yeah, from an access perspective, and I think to add to what Richard, Devik and George have already said, definitely for the integrator to understand what where the risks are and what to do it. I mean, in terms of access, we also have a hardening guide. We have a cybersecurity landing page with a lot of information on it. And we spend a lot of time sharing information as to what the role is for the integrator or the end customer. And then we typically have a few tools to support that case as well. So as an example, in the one section, we talk about taking inventory of the devices, what's on the system, what's the software, what's the firmware versions, making sure that we have the right procedures and security policies in place when doing that installation. But then from our side, we offer the Access Device Manager, which basically allows you to pull all those devices into a piece of software and see, are they on the latest version of firmware? And has it been updated? And is there anything that can be updated too? And of course, that then becomes the management of the site after it's been deployed. And typically we find something that's been installed after the first year, it's well maintained, but when we get to the third or fourth or fifth year, that's where they sort of start to lose track. And that's where a lot of these vulnerabilities start showing, because of course, I think Ian mentioned earlier is that attackers keep on developing new bits of software to try and gain access to these devices. And of course, this is an ongoing thing. So even when your technology starts to get old, that baseline of being able to be breached is still there. And I think that's definitely something to be kept in the back of your mind.
Great. Sorry, I'm on mute. I was just going to say, Charles, you're on mute, but yeah, okay. Anyway, Charles, would you like to?
Yeah, I think just to add on there, my experience with installers over years is that if I can just understand the basics very well and at least do that installation very neatly and properly, I'm already happy, I must be honest. To try and make them cyber specialists at the same time is, I think, a bit of a tall call. And this is where it all starts with architecture. You've got different specialists in different fields, just like you have in the medical field. Someone that does the brain surgery doesn't do the heart surgery, so you've got different specialists. Now, cybersecurity is a very, very specialist field as well. So I think it must all start with an architectural level And your systems integrator, your installer, needs to understand what their role is within that architecture, but you would obviously not ask them to sort of be able to draw up that architecture to make sure that their camera or the access control is properly secure and everything and so on. It must start from a specialist design perspective. I think that's the first thing, because yeah, as I say, just for them to do the basics right is, for me, is like, let them do that right, and let me get a specialist to support them in making sure it's properly segregated, etc., etc. But for them to understand it is already a good point, because then at least they can talk the same language when they talk about the architecture. They're not silly in terms of what they do.
Right. Ian, you had a comment.
Yeah, just wanted to echo what Charles said. I think that if security is baked in from the ground up, from the vendor level, then the integrator's job, the installer's job is a lot easier. They still need to do the basics right, especially on the segmentation, the isolation, and the DMZ side. But yeah, a lot of the security architecture can be handled back at the vendor's head office, and yeah, that takes a fair amount of burden off the end user if both the vendor and the integrator are doing their jobs.
Right. Okay. I want to get onto, I suppose it's a less technical issue, but the issue of social engineering. Specifically, the most obvious one we all know about today is phishing. People get continually told, don't open attachments from someone you don't know, or something like that. But what can we do to try and prevent the sort of the social engineering aspect? I mean, obviously the guys are going to continually try to get in via email or some kind of social media thing or whatever they use. But what is there something we can actually do in terms of training or technical protection to try and stop this sort of easy way in, if I can call it that? I think, Charles, if you'd like to carry on there.
I hope I don't talk too much, yeah. But no, I think there's two components. There's it's all about people, process, technology, and culture. So people, process, technologies needs to work very closely hand in hand from a governance perspective. So cyber awareness training, let's put it that way. If you go and work at a mine, or you work in a factory, you will never be allowed onto that mine if you didn't go through health and safety induction. So you have to have a green card or certified. Yet people are allowed to come onto your network without being certified or without having gone through a cyber awareness induction. So the IT department themselves cannot take full responsibility for cybersecurity. Everyone in the organization has got their role to play in that. But then you have to make sure that you also put the necessary technologies in place that will take the burden away from your average user to have to think, what is this email relevant or is this email not relevant? So technology to filter out the garbage from the good stuff, I think, is also important, because interesting enough that most organizations get compromised or get spearphished like in 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because you still got a couple of mails you have to do, and let me just quickly get through these last emails, at least my mailbox is clean. So the cyber criminals knows it, so they use that social behavior of people to then at that point in time attack. So yeah, cyber awareness training combined with the right kind of technology, both of those are critical in order to protect your organization and reduce your risk profile.
Richard, sorry about that. I'm having mute problems, finger problems.
No worries. So I think, yeah, maybe just to echo on what what was said there now, the social engineering works a lot more from the systems that control. You want to send out malware so you can take control of the control systems. A lot of the times, though, from an IoT perspective or an OT perspective or the security systems perspective, it's more a malicious attack as in to bring the system down. So they don't want to take control of the system unless it's a security camera and they want to be able to use it to spy or retrieve data there. But it's more dropping and creating impact to the business by shutting it down. So I think, again, the social engineering attacks are going to be geared more towards being able to get access to the systems from a username and password perspective. So again, if you don't have the multi-factor authentication in place, if you don't encrypt your switchboards with the MAC hardening or something like that to stop somebody taking Ethernet cable out and plugging in their laptop and using your credentials to get into the system, the social engineering aspect is kind of mute unless it's to inject malware onto the control systems themselves. But I do agree, user awareness training is a key aspect of that, training people how to spot malicious attacks. But again, just your password policies, I think, is probably the more relevant one in the OT environment, because if you have weak password controls in place, it's easier to get access to the systems.
Right. Davik, you also put your hand up there.
Yeah, just to once again re-echo what's been said by Richard. It's that thing, the social engineering element is trying to get to a asset and trying to take advantage of a person's credentials to get to that asset, can be either digital or physical. Many times that is just elaborated by either trying to fish somebody or in person on a site, trying to just have the right authority and attitude. So the way you approach a security guard to get past the access control barrier could be enough for you to actually get past that access control barrier. So the same with being vigilant about what your approach is to people entering your facilities. If I make this a more physical access control example, your security staff and your guards at that access point needs to have almost like the zero trust policy that was mentioned earlier. You need to verify first who you are, then I will trust who you say you are. And that approach needs to be taken into account. So it's having the knowledge is the knowledge of what type of attacks can be expected in social engineering, and understanding that they change with every year, and understanding that that can happen either through digital methods or in actual methods, and just having the actual training and updating your staff to say, this is what you need to be aware of. Always ask the question, verify who you are before I trust you who you are. And then that would be a better approach. So it's just the approach, because anybody can be hacked. It's just being vigilant thereof.
Cool, thank you. With Poppy coming up, well, I was going to say this year, but it's actually next month, in a few days, where it's going to actually be enacted and valid and all that kind of thing. The information regulator website is already overloaded with people registering as information officers and what have you. But will the sort of the compliance and the privacy issues Poppy sort of raises, is that going to make a difference in terms of the cybersecurity? Because obviously you have to take care of private information. So are we going to see a lot more sort of interest in cybersecurity because of Poppy and vice versa? Ian, I see you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, Andrew, I feel obligated to comment here because of my comments at the beginning. Yes, definitely. I think the answer to your question is yes. Poppy and general GRC, governance, risk and compliance, does push us all along as vendors, as integrators, network operators, and ultimately end users. As I said at the beginning, it is sort of the boring part of security. Lots of documentation and stuff, but definitely it will push us along. By no means is it a silver bullet there. I think that's important. I think the user education about to thwart the social engineering is just as important. And asset classification and vulnerability management, red teaming, pen testing, all these things should not fall by the wayside just because you're now Poppy compliant or something. It should be in addition to.
Okay, Richard, you had a comment as well.
Yeah, maybe just to follow on from what Ian said, with Poppy, I think a lot of the stuff in Poppy is actually based on other standards out there as well. I think if you look at standards like PCI, which a lot of companies are adopting already, there is already aspects of Poppy in that. So I definitely agree. Cybersecurity is going to play a key part in POP here, because there's the organizational structure of, what the process flows of data, but then there's the cybersecurity aspect of where does my data reside, or the IT component. If you, for argument's sake, we're using some kind of security system and your data was residing in the cloud in the States, give an example, one of the vendors that I'm aware of, it's a cloud-based security solution, and all the data is currently residing in the States. They're looking to put it into a data center in Germany just to comply with GDPR. So, these are the kinds of things you're going to have to safeguard that data, number one. Part of the POPIA regulation also says that if your data is hosted in the cloud, the controls there have to be as strong, if not better, than the current controls you have in place in your organization. That all talks to cybersecurity again. So I think it's going to play a huge amount of emphasis on POPIA, making sure that your data is secured and that you know where it is and that is classified correctly.
Cool, thank you. Davik, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just talking about when you're looking at it from a physical security point, again, what type of information you're capturing at your ingress and egress points. Just wanted to make the point that a lot of times I see in all the different data sheets of the different vendors, they're all GDPR compliant, they're all essentially POPI compliant. The big issue I find is that all the settings making them GDPR compliant has this little nice off switch that you can tick when you're setting it up. So just noting to the clients that's listening, if the technology notes that they are GDPR compliant, there's still a process that needs to take place in the installation side to ensure that it is compliant. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on it.
Thanks. Charles?
Yeah, the technology part is just one very critical, but one small element of POPI in terms of, how data is protected and accessed and so on. So obviously there's accountability in terms of who's responsible for it. There's a way in terms of how you process it, and there's obviously special purpose specifications that are relevant. So there's about 8 conditions, of which the security safeguards is condition number 7, where the technology comes in. So there's a huge element of process, legal perspective. There's obviously a couple of legal elements in it, and that's why the legal firms have driven POPI quite hard, because they had to make sure between the data subjects and you who control the data is properly in place. And then obviously you also share information with other people. So let's take a typical case where you install a CCTV access camera. I'm the installer. I would install the CCTV details. I have the details of the users that I'm going to give access to, and that's going to monitor all that whole environment, which means that as an installer, I have the client's details, and I need to make sure that access into that CCTV is properly protected, that no one can just get access to it, and also who I give access the information to, and that information is protected. But then I may share some of that CCTV footage with someone external. I'm using an example. I don't think if it's possible, but sharing it with someone external, which means that it's now a third party who has access to that data. So I need to make sure that whose data I collect, the data that I'm responsible for, and who I'm sharing it with is all controlled, and that people give consent to it. And then we're not even talking about information about children. There's a specific clause just regarding children. So if you think about CCTV in schools, is actually even more important than CCTV at a normal mine, because there's a specific element in POPI just regarding the confidentiality of children and what they give consent to, etc., etc. But technology is only relevant to element number 7 in the POPI, which consists of a lot of conditions. Condition number 7.
Thank you. George, your comments.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to, there is a definite guideline around what POPI entails, right? In a video environment, it's very, very specific. And exactly what he said is that it's where does the data sit, who has access to the data, and who's allowed to see that data. It's quite critical in our industry. Mileson's been a GDPR compliant product for many, many years. But as Devik said, it doesn't mean that the product ticks the box, that the product is exactly compliant. And there is definitely a full guideline around that. I mean, we're dealing with companies like Vumacam in South Africa, Cap Security, and many others, where quite often the SAPS think they have the right to walk into control rooms and gather information. But who do we know that these people actually not the perpetrators themselves that are trying to delete evidence, et cetera, et cetera. So it's exceptionally critical in terms of understanding the guidelines around POPI.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Marcel, your hand went up.
Yeah, just to add on to George, I think definitely Access went through a big process to become GDPR compliant when that rolled out, and of course we continue to be compliant. I think the benefit for some of the global accounts is once you become GDPR compliant, it's a global thing, so everybody has to comply. So I think we in South Africa are pretty much set up for POPI. Of course, we will go through more processes to work with our partners and to work locally with the teams to make sure that we remain compliant, not just from the hardware perspective, but also from an access perspective and what we do with the data that we collect from our partners in our channel. And I think that's important. The important point that George brought up as well is, of course, if the product is compliant, it's who's handling it and do they understand? I think Shah also sort of touched on it, especially in the schools environments, is what you can do to do it. And we have started to develop a few software packages that you can be used. So we do something called a live privacy shield. So you have the ability to record the footage, but not anybody just viewing it is able to see it. There's a privacy shield around the people, and only people with specific access is able to actually access that data and see the full footage. So hopefully we'll see a few more developments coming in the years to come. But of course, I think POPI is definitely going to affect the way we work with the local industry. Yeah.
Right. Just a question, sort of taking POPI a little bit further. For people who operate services, and just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of Vox with their Guardian Eye service, where they monitor companies remotely and all that. How important or how difficult is it to get your whole monitoring system sort of POPI certified or verified? I'm not sure what compliant is probably the right word.
Yeah, I think, we're quite fortunate in the fact that as Vox, we have quite a large data center capability in South Africa already. So we know where our data resides from that aspect. There's very strict controls in place to control access to that data. We ourselves as Vox are now ISO 27001 certified, so we've been through quite a hectic audits of our environment and everything that connects into it to make sure that we are certified. We do POPIA readiness assessments, which we've done on our own internal environment as well. So I think from that aspect, we are putting a lot of controls in place, but we're also assessing our compliance to the regulations. And then obviously, the clients will see the ISO certification and they'll know that there is that level of protection in place, which we're then obviously offering to our clients. So, we're quite confident that we're complying.
And in a public area, I mean, previously, if as long as you had the picture of the CCTV camera up, it was fine, just telling people that there's recording. Is that now sufficient for POPIA as well, or do you have to, provide more information? And this is to anyone who wants to answer that. Is there more that you need to tell the public or people who are coming into your business complex or something? Charles, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, I think with the normal office blocks and so on, usually people sign the little form. These days it's just scanning your barcode of your license and things like that, but there's more than is required than that. It's you almost have to ask people that permission to say you are hereby giving consent that by coming into this property, not only from a health and safety perspective, but also from a data privacy point of view, that you are allowing the organization the property that you are entering to actually have access to who you are and the confidentiality of your information that you've got. I mean, even people signing these COVID forms. I mean, it's a poppy nightmare because people fill in their IDs and their contact details and they fill in everything and so on. But what does the organization do with that papers afterwards? Do they just keep it in a file or do they just like throw it around or whatever? I mean, it's as simple as filling in a COVID form at an organization. So yeah, consent is the big thing. Individuals will have to give consent. So you have to make it very visible to say you allowed us to actually collect your personal information. So people are definitely have to do more, just like they will do in their contracts.
Right. Richard.
Yeah, just maybe touching base on what's been said by Charles. Little simple thing like signing in at a complex, you now give away a lot of information there. I think the complexes are now going to have to become more POPI compliant. The cameras we mentioned earlier about filming kids at school, I think we're going to have to get consent where the CCTV cameras are placed. There was another point that I had which completely slipped my mind now, but we were talking about RICA earlier as well, RICA and FICA. I think they start to conflict with POPIA as well. We're giving away information to become FICA and RICA compliant, but at the same time, it's kind of going against the laws of POPIA. So I think even some of those standards are going to have to be re-looked to see if they actually conform with POPIA, or otherwise we're going to have exclusions in the POPIA law to say that FICA and RICA supersedes it. And you must remember as well that FICA is actually pushed on us internationally from a banking perspective. If you don't comply with FICA laws, some of the international companies won't allow you to transact. So I think the guys are going to have to seriously sit there and look at some of these regulations and see where they conflict with each other. And then from a security perspective, I think it's going to be the same. At what point do you take a person's rights away because of POPIA? The right to protect yourself by filming. There's already things going on about criminals where they aren't allowed to show their faces on Facebook after an arrest has been made. And if you've got CCTV footage that shows a criminal's face, you could hinder a criminal case. So yeah, there's a lot of regulations and a lot of things that you've got to be mindful of from those aspects. And I think POPIA is just going to create another headache for a lot of people. It's a necessary one, but at the same time, it's going to be a headache.
Right. Okay. Okay, thank you. The idea was initially to end at 11, but we're slightly over time. But thank you to the panel. Thank you, guys. Some really great answers that you guys put through there. And thank you for the attendees. Thank you for attending. We appreciate your time. I hope it was of value. And there was a question that came up recently asking for some advice, and George, you answered it and said, get in touch with us. If you're on Zoom, remember you can go to as soon as the event stops, you'll be directed to a web page and you'll see all the guys' names there, and you can click next to whichever one or two or three or however many guys you want to contact you and enter your email address, and we will pass that email on to those guys and they can contact you directly to answer any particular questions you have. For those of you who are on YouTube, I know some guys went over to YouTube. Thank you for joining us there as well. Unfortunately, you won't be directed to the website, but if you do have any queries, my email address is andrew@technews.co.za, and you're welcome to send it to me and I'll forward it to whoever the relevant person or persons are. So I think that's about it. Thank you very much, everyone. Again, thanks to the panel and thanks to Milestone for sponsoring this and making this possible. Really appreciate it. And sure, hope everyone has a good day and we'll see you next time.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
Nice
Cheers.